before I just answer that question, I want to say thanks to the award committee at JSFD for selecting me and taking the time to review the application. I also just want to thank all my colleagues who have supported me, as well as the research participants and organizations I've worked with. So how did I break into the sport for development field? It was actually during my master's research. I had a really excellent opportunity through a partnership at Brock University with Commonwealth Sport Canada as part of their SportWorks program to travel to Eswatini, or formerly Swaziland, to be an intern as well as conduct research as part of my master's research into sport for development. So that was a really cool opportunity for me to both work as well as research. And I was working within a high-performance sport organization that implemented sport for development at a community-based location. And that was a really enjoyable experience. It was my first time really being involved with sport for development firsthand. But at the same time, my training with my master's supervisor, Dr. Lisa Kiklis at Brock, into critical perspectives and taking, reading about post-colonial lens in sport for development, it really made me focus on both the positive and negative consequences of sport for development, really particularly when considering Global North partners, Global North funders, as well as interns like me, traveling to the Global South to do work within the sector. And so that really led to me pursuing more research in relation to the power relations in sport for development and experiences of Global North interns. So I chose the Journal of Sport for Development as an outlet for my research, most importantly because I think with a lot of the work we do in sport for development, whether we be practitioners, whether it be researchers, policymakers, whatever it is, when thinking about the actual participants who are involved in programs, the groups and the communities that we work with and hope to support in regard to responding to social inequalities via sport for development, it's not often that those participants or those organizations we work with might have access to academic journals that have paywalls, that you have to pay for articles. They might not even be interested in really reading academic articles, to be honest. So I think Journal of Sport for Development, the biggest thing to me is its open access element, an excellent way to share research more widely, to share research findings with the general public, with those organizations, those practitioners we work with. And then, the article I wrote was part of the Sport and Livelihood special issue. And that included 2 articles that were practitioner-led. And I think Journal of Sport for Development's focus and, encouragement of practitioners to submit to the journal, to have people on the ground actually talking about what's taking place beyond just, research findings and academic work. Those insights are, super important for the progression of the sport for development field. So, those are kind of the 2 main reasons that I chose JSFD as an outlet for my work. A lot of my research that I've done so far falls around kind of 3 areas or 3 questions. So one is just, that general question, how may sport, leisure, recreation, physical activity, how can it contribute to or hinder development, whatever that is, gender equality, economic empowerment. And that could be in relation to individuals, communities, regions, maybe even countries. Second, and this is what I've become really increasingly interested in, is what social entrepreneurial strategies are adopted and really implemented by sport organizations, by staff, by program participants even. How are they engaging in entrepreneurship and innovation through sport to achieve development goals? And then lastly is kind of taking that broader view, looking a bit more at that institutional environment that organizations and participants are operating within and against, and how does that institutional environment constrain or promote social change of the inequalities or the development goals that we're trying to achieve. So up to date, I've engaged in research both here in Canada, where I've lived and done my schooling, but also internationally. I've done a lot of work, particularly in Uganda, and I utilize different theories and concepts, but I'd say my main kind of 3 ones are post-colonial management theory, institutional theory, and diaspora. And so I do try and use theories that are kind of interdisciplinary in nature. But like I said, right now, I'm really focused on the social entrepreneurship and innovation aspect of sport for development, particularly in regard to how refugees create and implement novel ideas using sport for development. An area I hope to explore further, I mean, there's so much work taking place in sport for development now, but like I said, I am really interested in that social entrepreneurship and innovation aspect, and I want to explore it in more depth. I mean, there's been a lot more empirical investigation recently by, Per Stevenson, Greg Joachim, and many others, but I still think there's more to explore in new ways and with different concepts and theories. So one thing I really want to understand more is how participants, how staff, how communities might be engaging in transnational entrepreneurship. And this area is actually particularly relevant not only for sport for development, given its international nature, but for immigrant and refugee communities who might be living in diaspora, for example, who might be creating sport for development programs, participating in them, or simply engaging in kind of physical activity, leisure, or sport informally without like a structured program. And so what I mean by transnational entrepreneurship, I mean, I haven't explored it yet, so I'm still kind of learning more about it, but it's this research stream within entrepreneurial studies that really focuses on how individuals that migrate from one country to another might maintain business-related linkages back home. They might receive remittances from home, or they might also be using ideas from their diaspora within their diaspora community. So whether they travel physically or virtually, they might engage in 2 or more socially embedded environments. And so I want to learn more about how they're engaging in entrepreneurship across borders, how they might bring ideas from one community to another. And I want to see if this is taking place in sport for development, which I believe it is through some of my previous work, but I haven't explored it in depth. So that's something I'm particularly interested in exploring further. An area that, in my opinion, doesn't see enough research is, again, I feel like I'm saying the same stuff, but is social entrepreneurship and innovation. So it's definitely grown recently, but I feel like there's so much more opportunities, whether it be in regard to maybe investigating entrepreneurship from a post-colonial or decolonial lens, understanding how entrepreneurship is understood by participants in the global south of sport for development compared to what we define entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship as in the global north. Also in regard to social missions of sport for development organizations and how they're succeeding in achieving social entrepreneurship. And then there's also questions, I think, around how those program participants, particularly, for example, women and people of color, are engaging in social entrepreneurship and how they employ their own understandings of innovation in sport for development. And then it might just be more broadly in regard to new ideas. So it could be in regard to esport. How is that going to contribute to sport for development in the future? What kind of research is taking place in regard to that? So I think the sport for development field is, by its nature, very entrepreneurial, but exploring it further and coming up with new ideas and kind of pushing the field forward, whether it be new concepts, new program models, new funding opportunities, and those types of things are really important for the future of the field and require more research. I think the main thing that sticks out to me is to seek out collaborations with not only other early career scholars, graduate students, and established scholars, but also with practitioners, with organizations. In my experience, this has really led to an opening of new doors, to learn from others, to learn from people on the ground actually doing this work, at the same time as building really collegial relationships and finding new opportunities, whether that be just writing a paper, having a conversation informally, which can really, build ideas around sport for development. So I feel really incredibly lucky to collaborate with people who are open to doing so and are extremely welcome. And I'd encourage, other early scholars to really reach out, make an attempt to network and be able to work with others, whether, like I said, that be organizations or scholars. So one other thing I would add too is to make sure that what you're doing, the research you're pursuing, that you're passionate about it. I think it's really important. Sometimes with research, you get into a big project, but you might not be exploring what really is most of interest to you. And so being able to actually look into and investigate those key areas that you're most passionate about is really important and can lead to a successful career, I would say. So where do I see the sector of sport for development going? It's a big question. I think for me, I think we're starting to see some movement on creating kind of common indicators of the contribution of sport for development. So, the Commonwealth Secretariat with the sport and sustainable development indicators have really developed. And during COVID, I attended a lot of webinars, which was quite nice. For example, one was held by the World Health Organization, and there's discussion around how to rebuild sport better post-COVID, including, sport for development. And a lot of those discussion points brought up about, having these universal indicators, having this common set that can be applied in different contexts, and being able to clearly say, here's the contribution that sport for development is making to the sustainable development goals. I would maybe say also, I do see it going that way, but I think, of course, it's always good to have caution about, complex institutional environments where, sport for development takes place in. And also be cautious about tailoring those specific to the context in which sport for development is taking place. And then another way I see, the future of sport for development going is professionalization. There's more training opportunities, whether it be by sport and dev. There's more universities degrees and courses. And this is something that I see as required for the future of sport for development as more and more people become involved. They're looking for specific training for the purposes of sport for development specifically. And then lastly is the role of technology. I mentioned esport, but just the ways in which technology continues to be important in the field, whether that be in regard to monitoring and evaluation, using phones to track development goals, or whether that be in regard to integrating esport into sport for development programs. I think technology holds a big spot in the future. There's so many out there and so many great organizations and people doing amazing work in sport for development. It's hard to choose, but I think I would go, if I had to pick one, I'd have to go with one of the organizations I've worked with previously, which is Young African Refugees for Integral Development in Uganda. And the reason it's one of my favorite projects is not only because the people there are doing such great work and I've worked with them, so I'm a little biased, but they've been working with refugees for many, many years, using sport for development. And when you're there, when you're actually on the ground working with them, it's amazing how far of a reach they have in Uganda. They're actually now implementing sport for development in refugee camps. Before it was just all urban environments. And they've been able to really scale up their organization in great ways. And I think it's an example of how a sport for development project can just start from simply just bringing people together to play a couple games of football, all the way into now not only implementing sport for development, but a number of other programs such as women empowerment programs, and seeing that it is possible for sport for development to contribute to development goals, and they've been successful doing that. And I'm really happy that I've been able to work with them and grateful that I have been.